You are first of all a veteran in the Israeli responsible investment industry. You are the CEO and founder of Greeneye. You have a relationship with VigeoEiris. That's why you are sitting together?
That's what Romy told me.
Romy is our boss is the boss of everyone of us. So I am French from origin. I tell that to save you time to try to understand from where is my weird accent. Rating agencies are catalysts for change. Rating agencies have the power to ask questions, and questions raise awareness, and with awareness comes change. So the discussion today will focus at helping Israeli organizations to better understand what are the expectations of rating agencies, and through them, investors. Okay? So the questions we pair together are in this optic. We'll begin with Dror. Dror, can you give us an overview of ESG in the world? Okay? How it looks like per region, please.
Sure, thank you, Philippe. First of all, your accent is perfectly normal, it's perfectly fine.
Thank you. You'll have 3 more minutes for talking.
Yes, so just to give you a bit of an overview of myself and what I do in Bloomberg. So in Bloomberg we try to gather all the data. All the data regarding ESG, financial data in whole, but ESG, this is my kind of like area of expertise, and to sort of not just aggregate all the information, but also to provide clients and investors with the specific tools which will make them to assess risk analysis and on an industry level. ESG risk analysis and on an industry level. Now, I've made a really brief presentation, and I want to link some trends within the ESG world and to our functionality usage as well. So, the first thing you see here, the first slide, is the growth of the demand in ESG functionality in Bloomberg. And this is from 2014 to 2017. Now, what you can see here is an annual growth of around 200% in the usage of ESG functions in Bloomberg. And this is sort of aligned with, if we can go to also the growth of investments in SRI, asset data management, from 2014 to 2016 to 2017, Q1, Q2. And what you can see here is sort of like a correlation between the demand and the actual money that's invested in SRI assets. In terms of what kind of data investors and clients are looking for, so until now, you can probably divide it into 80%. So 80% is a bit less sophisticated investors who try to go to Bloomberg and to come here and say, okay, we want Bloomberg as a one-stop shop. What does it mean? We want some exclusion lists, we want some scores, and we want a very, very basic and easy to understand tool in order to assess risk in terms of sustainability on a company level. Now, I want to speak a bit about this presentation, this slide here. So the main catalyst for the SRI investments regionally, the main catalyst are pension funds. This is what kind of like the conclusion that we have come to. You can see that there is a quite substantial growth in regions like Japan. There is also a growing demand in the US and Canada. Actually, about Japan, a quick note. The Japanese pension fund, which is one of the biggest in the world, also now has pledged to allocate 10% of its assets to SRI investments. It's quite a big thing, and in my opinion, you know, the upward trend will keep going. And just another quick note about Europe. So we can see that Europe, the European, you know, investment funds, institutional funds, and asset managers are the leading firms, the leading region in terms of SRI, assets under management. It's kind of like leveled off, I suppose, between 2014 to 2016. But again, we see a big trend of more money invested into these assets, and obviously more tools, demand for tools to be able to analyze them and analyze the allocation of assets. We can see also the 5, 6 largest money managers around the world, around Europe, who have pledged to abide by the 6 PRI, rules. I would say UBS, Vanguard, Fidelity joined recently. So, in terms of what pushing these investments is mainly investors who want to see not just the social aspects of what the company is investing in, but also the carbon footprint of a company, the governance, and so on and so on. I would like to maybe go to this third slide. I'm sorry, Philippe, I know that I have 5 to 7 minutes, so I will try to make it as quick as possible. Just to give you a quick overview of the slide, what we see here is on the y-axis we see Robeco SAM, quality score, and on the x-axis we see Bloomberg disclosure score. I apologize, it's so small. I tried to expand as much as I could, but I will just give you a brief of what exactly we see here. So, first of all, we see a correlation of around 40%, 0.4, between the volume the company discloses and the actual performance in terms of ESG factors of the company. So, on the right-hand side of the graph, you see many European countries that are performing pretty well in terms of not just disclosure, but also quality. This is quite aligned with the portion of money invested in SRI assets in Europe, because European investors drive European companies to disclose more and to operate in a better way, in a more sustainable way. I wanted to talk a bit about Israel, because Israel is on the bottom left-hand side, a place you don't really want to be in. This is mainly due to lack of disclosure, I would say, and also the performance, in terms of performance, so it definitely can improve in that area. Just a quick note about Bloomberg disclosure score. So what we do here, we basically take all the volume, the material volume that the company chooses to disclose, and we just score them, by the volume that they disclose. So it's not a quality score, more like a transparency score, I would say. And it also gave you an indication of, how much the companies in Israel are willing to operate within the ESG space and the sustainability space. So one more thing also about the United States and North America. I would say that a bigger push from North American clients and investors in terms of like, okay, I want you to disclose key material aspects in your performance. I think that this will probably drive the US ranking here a bit upwards. I think that we will have a nicer trend or more an upward trend in the next years to come. Of course, Donald Trump won't help for this trend to happen, but it's definitely where we're going in the moment. And from what I see in Bloomberg and from what I see from the clients that we have in Bloomberg and the investors, we do see more demand within Europe. If we go back to the first slide, I just want to quickly talk about the first slide. So this growth over here is mainly driven by Japanese investors and European investors. So this is the main usage case. And I will be more than happy to discuss about the tools, the offering, the global trend after this conference. If you want, just message me or come to see me after to learn more about Bloomberg's offering.
Thank you. Rami, can you go to the last slide? First of all, that's quite comforting that we are a little bit above the United States. Okay, it would be a nice disclosure that we would say that also.
Yeah. A bit above them.
Yeah, that's the reason we have only one representative from the States. Ulrika, Dror talked about the disclosure, and it was also mentioned at the present panel, there is really a market resistance for disclosure. And it's a challenge for rating agencies, but it's mainly a challenge for the organization. What can you say to Israeli organizations here that have some reluctance and dilemma to what to disclose? Is there in their advantage to disclose? What should they do? We don't hear you.
Hello. I liked your last slide. Is it possible to have it up again? Because I think that, or maybe not, but the case on your slide, performance versus disclosure, and as you mentioned, Israel and Japan is at the bottom left, and you have Spain at the top.
Yeah, we have Spain.
So I mean, there's something to think about that in terms of, you know, what I would challenge as the disclosure challenge.
Yeah.
You know, what is disclosure? And I think in my 5 to 7 minute introduction, I actually want to focus on the challenge of disclosure, because we all know that there is huge demand and expectations for disclosure by companies and also by investors. So it's a general trend. We cannot stop it. But so the challenge is for all of their ESG ratings or rating institutes, you know, all of us in this space, to really be clear about what it is that we rate and what it is that we ask companies to disclose. I think at least in my perspective, and I'd be happy to be challenged on this, I think we need to sort out the question, who's who? Who are these ESG analysts? What is their mandate? Who are they working for? And who are actually the companies that they are reaching out to with questions or for dialogue or with questionnaires, etc. And in which context are the companies the targets for the analysts? And so, you know, with the disclosure challenge, you know, tying that back to the topic of this session, you know, living up to the ESG expectations, that all depends on what the analysts are asking for on disclosure. And in the previous session, we sort of elaborate a little bit around that. But I think it is crucial to okay, we have a platform for disclosure in general. I mean, we have frameworks such as the GRI, the SASB framework out of the US. You can say Carbon Disclosure Project. I mean, and these initiatives will keep coming. And we have the EU directive, and there is both voluntary guidelines to disclose. There's EU law to disclose. So, but it is a challenge, because it's in the definition of what is being asked to disclose that then lead to the ESG analyst making an assessment, a ranking, a conclusion that one or the other investor is asking for. And investors have, as we heard also in the previous discussion, and that what we know, investors from around the world have different strategies, investment strategies, and also sustainability strategies. And I am actually, this slide here with the United States and Israel and Japan being, you know, at the bottom, are we concluding, what are the conclusions we're making from that? You know, because we know that Israel is the startup nation, we know that there is fantastic innovation that can be, and business conduct and behavior and strategies that can be so well linked and tied to positive impact for the environment, for people, and we know that many of the companies from Israel, they go global from day one, or even in the minds of the entrepreneur. We know that we have fantastic companies in Japan. They don't disclose. There's so often that European investors reach out to Japanese companies. First of all, there's a language barrier, there's no disclosure, and so then the ESG analysts may go back and say, well, we give them a poor rating because they don't disclose. It's okay to do that, but then you have to have a disclaimer saying, this rating is based on disclosure. Mm-hmm. And the rating cannot say that this is an ESG rating or a sustainability rating, because we don't know. We don't know. And you mentioned the government pension in Japan. Yes, it's the world's largest. They are now, of course, they are outsourcing their asset management to external fund and asset managers, and they're asking for good levels of corporate governance, stewardship, responsible investment, and it's all about inclusion. They're actually making an inclusion list. And I was talking to one of my colleagues in Tokyo just earlier this week, and he said, I hear that in Europe there is this sort of global exclusion list. And I'm saying, okay, where is that? But if we look at, because Japan is looking for inclusion, and Europe is focusing on exclusion, where does that big exclusion list come from? Well, maybe the Norges Bank. That's also one of the world's largest players, and they have focused on exclusion. So again, with disclosure, we need to
yes, of course,
connect all the dots and be clear and transparent also on what it is that we as ESG analysts are actually assessing, concluding, rating, ranking, scoring. I think.
Thank you. So there are different levels of maturity between countries.
Yeah.
And there are different between rating agencies, and we understand also within the rating agencies. Okay. And Cristina. Okay. We would like to have through you the point of view of the investors.
Yeah.
Do you see any trends when you look past, present, futures? What do we see over the horizon?
Yes, I will answer to this question, but I also wanted to continue a bit on the disclosure topic if I can. So because I also listened to the previous panel, and indeed this issue of disclosure is quite challenging for both companies and investors. And I see this in two ways. One thing is, okay, the company that doesn't want to cooperate for any reason, and it's fine. But the other thing is also the company that does not understand what the investors want or are asking. So this is important, and this is something that we can tackle also from our perspective of rating agencies. So on this, what I can say is that our rating framework, and I talk for VigeoEiris, but I think I can talk also for the other rating agencies, are really are stable. More or less the criteria that we use are more or less always the same. But we are also integrating the new emerging ESG issues that the world is facing, and so the companies are facing. And in order to assess the companies, what we do is to enter into dialogue with them. We also developed right now an online platform in order to make sure that each company and the associated CSR ESG analysts are in touch every day, even out of the rating process. And the questions that we ask to the companies are really a good management tool for companies, in the sense that they can see what we ask to them. They can because through the questions they can understand what is important for investors, and then they can also react, saying, "Look, you are asking to me, who I'm an Israeli company, something that doesn't make any sense from my point of view." So this is where also the companies can raise the things and engage with the rating agencies or with investors on their points. So this is what we are asking for as well to companies. In terms of investors. So in terms of investors, so we have seen that the market is growing, and I think it's a good news, and we are all aware about that. But what we also observed is that not only the demands of SRI is growing, but also the complexity of the demand is growing. So since I started almost 20 years ago to work in this field, I observed, but I can say all of us have observed a shift in the focus of investors from just excluding what was not acceptable from a moral point of view. So, any country had their different opinion on what was acceptable, to situations where investors are paying more and more attention to the sustainability profile of companies. And why this has happened? This has happened because there is an increased awareness on the fact that ESG is financially material. So the companies that are neglecting a number of social and environmental impacts are of course more exposed to reputational damages, to conflict with stakeholders, to fines, to legal proceedings, and all of this has an impact on the value creation of the company. And I would say that more than this, in this specific landscape where we where we operate and we live, which is really dominated by the consequences of the financial crisis, by the fears related to the economic slowdown, the increase in inequalities, immigrations, all a number of challenges which are, well, I would say, well framed within the Sustainable Development Goals that have been adopted by the United Nations in 2015. It's even more crucial, and investors know that, to invest in companies that are able to address this challenge, because they will be the winners of the future, I would say. So this is really a lot about risk. So our role as extra financial rating agencies in all of this is to inform investors in what's happening. So this evolving landscape, which are the new ESG emerging issues they have to pay attention to, but also to formulate opinions on the companies on the base of all of this. So how we do that, as I said, we engage with companies on the base of our rating framework in order to gather information, but also to gather their insight in what they feel is more material for them, in order to provide an opinion to investors which is the most complete and the most comprehensive and objective as possible. How then investors use our assessment? Well, it depends, because we saw that different investors in different parts of the world have different perspective. So I took mainly for Europe, and I would say that our clients use our score either to exclude companies with a low ESG score, so because this means companies with weak performances in their ability to manage and mitigate ESG risks, or maybe investors have a best-in-class approach, so reward the companies which are the best performer in their region and in their sector. Or they mix both practices, or since, for example, in Europe we are pretty much concerned by the consequences of climate change. There was the COP21, there are a number of regulations related to that, but we are also a lot concerned by the Sustainable Development Goals, which is something on which there is a lot of attention also from regulators. Some investors ask us not only to provide information on the ESG performance of companies, but also to provide information on the companies that through their products and services are more contributing to the achievement of this low energy transition economy, to everything. So this is the type, of information that we are providing, and these are more or less the interest of investors on this point.
Thank you very much. First, for continuing the disclosure issues, which is really a challenge, and understanding where the world is going in this time of ESG. Afterward, Marie-Bénédicte will continue on SDGs. Before that, Sam, you have both a view of the US, but you are also traveling a lot in Europe, so you have a comparison view. And also we had a very interesting discussion yesterday night on Israel and how Israel is viewed by the investor. So can you mix for us the US point of view, Israeli point of view?
Sure, yeah. So first, I figure I'll tell a little bit about the history and the trends of responsible investing in the United States. Traditionally, I think it differed a lot from Europe. Maybe 10 years ago, responsible investing in the U.S. was really focused in on exclusions based on what we call screening. So if an investor says a particular business runs contrary to that investor's values, ethical values, then they would exclude that, and they'll screen that business, that company, out of their investments. And it's still popular in the United States, and it's evolved. We're now getting requests for screens about which companies are involved in coal, because there's a lot of activism related to climate change. Just a fun fact: we've actually I also wanted to say that U.S. investors, in terms of Israel, they see Israel pretty favorably. I'd say, in general, maybe more favorably than maybe a lot of Europeans in some ways. We still get kind of activists and social responsible investors in the United States that are looking to divest from Israeli companies, for instance. But it's pretty rare. And in fact, there's been several laws passed in different states recently, where the state governments would say they would pass a law saying any company that is publicly pro BDS, they will divest from them. So now we're getting questions about screens for anti-BDS, so that state pension funds will not invest in any company that supports BDS. But those sort of screening approaches, those were really focused in on really your SRI-based funds, or very specific to a mandate from a particular client on ESG. Where we've seen the most growth is in our product line called ESG Ratings, which is really focused in on how environmental, social, and governance has an impact on the risk and return and opportunities of companies. So it's really looking at the core aspect of companies. And you're still going to get SRI groups that are interested in corporate responsibility and basically how the company is bettering society in a way. But really, in essence, investors are looking for alpha, and they're looking for alpha by saying, how is this company managing its risks? For example, if you're a company that is producing, say, watches, and you report on climate change, that's great. You're going to appeal to certain investors that are concerned about climate change, but really, mainstream investors are going to be concerned about what are those main drivers of risk for that company. Do they have proper sourcing rules? And if you're a pharmaceutical company, do you have proper rules in terms of managing product safety of your products? If you're a bank, do you have proper controls in place to manage corruption, and that you're managing the risks of your investments and the services you provide to your clients, et cetera? And that's where we've seen the most growth, and it's really been bought on by institutional investors widely, but we're seeing more and more growth on the retail side as well, and so that's and I see that those opportunities are continuing to grow. I think we've seen great buy-in over the years, and I think I think that's gonna keep continuing to pick up. In terms of how investors are using our information, they do have the mainstream will say, okay, well, now we have a better understanding of the risk of these companies, and so therefore they can say, well, based on the risk, it's not worth the return that we're expecting for this company, so they're just not going to invest. Or they may actually say, we really like this company, we're in it for the long term, so they will use our information to engage with companies and say, these are key risks that you should be addressing. But I would say also, so when we come up with our ratings, we're only looking at what we see as material key issues, key risks. We're not looking at every single different CSR type project that companies have. And so, but I would say one of the most universally accepted key issues is on corporate governance. And we haven't talked a lot about corporate governance. It's not really your typical CSR type aspect, but it's certainly very big for ESG. Mm-hmm. And I was doing some research recently, looking at the Israeli companies, and our screen or our evaluation of Israeli company corporate governance is generally Israeli companies do quite well, I think, in corporate governance, but there are some clear areas that the Israeli companies kind of fail at or consistently have problems, and one of them is on accounting. We have a lot of flags on different aggressive accounting standards of Israeli companies, or audit committees are not fully independent. And then another one is related to related party transactions, which was actually 60% of the companies that we rate in the Israeli market are flagged for having a related party transaction, which is not the highest in the world. For India, for instance, I think it's over 80% of companies are flagged, and France also is pretty high, like 50%. But it differs a lot from the UK and from the US. The US is something like a third of companies are flagged for related party transactions, and that so Israeli companies should understand kind of where are these differences in expectations, and what is the norm for U.S. investors. Where are they going to see that these related party transactions are a real flag, that they're maybe these companies are not necessarily working for shareholders, or not. And I think Israeli companies need to understand, and present themselves as to help foreign investors understand the narrative of these companies and how they're addressing certain risks and what they're doing to mitigate risks as well.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
First of all, exactly 7 minutes, so you did it. Thank you very much. So good perspective from Europe, from the States. Now we'll go to specific angles of the SDGs, of the ESG with the SDG. Marie-Bénédicte. So first of all, can you explain for those who are not aware of what are the SDGs and how and to which pace they are integrated in the rating?
Yes, sure. So the SDGs are a framework that has been adopted by the United Nations, setting 17 objectives, primarily for governments, but also we can say applicable to businesses. And those 17 objectives are dissected, let's say, with, I think we count 169 targets to achieve. Part of those 17 objectives. So these SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, are the continuity of the objectives for the millennium, and they are a global framework. A global framework that helps tackle, as Cristina was saying earlier, big challenges and risks that the world see arising around CSR and development and peace and health, etc. So we at OEKOM we really take it as a global framework, and I think most of us will do so. When all the discussions were going on around the SDGs 2 years ago, the discussion started also at OEKOM on what could be the implication for businesses, and how could it be assessed to evaluate the impact of a company in relation with those SDGs. So we have been starting thinking about what are those 17 objectives that are applicable to businesses, because in the first place they were designed for supranationals, for countries, for governments. So when we started our thinking and our discussions internally, we identified 13 of them that have very specific business implications for which we can identify business opportunities. So we have put together, after long discussions internally, we've put together a methodology to assess the performance of companies through their product portfolio. So for each company, we have been assessing the products and services that are commercialized, and we have identified whether those products and services have a positive impact or a negative impact towards the achievement of those SDGs. And so out of a very complex methodology, and I won't go through that because it's not of interest for the discussion today, but we can score the companies. We can say overall this company has a score of X that is positive towards the achievement of the SDG. And I think it's very important today because, as Cristina and as others were saying earlier today, the SDGs are these days pretty well adopted by investors, by asset managers. You see funds created around certain topics addressed by the SDGs. You see indexes linked to the SDGs, and you see the attention that public pension funds are putting into the SDGs. So definitely the attention of the investment community is not necessarily focused, but there is a focus on the SDGs. So helping investors and asset owners understand how much their investment is targeted towards companies with a good impact on the achievement or a contribution towards the achievement of the SDGs is what we aimed at when we developed this methodology, which has been adopted by a few of them already.
That's very nice. Thank you very much. Yes.
And maybe to give an example, we discussed over the phone when we prepared the conference about the banking sector, and I was explaining that when we look at banks, for example, we will look at the objectives are either social or environmental. So if I take the social the social objectives, we will look if a bank, for example, has developed microinsurance, microfinance, specific loans for women entrepreneurs, if the bank has issued green bonds to finance the green transition, if the bank is investing in or giving loans to increase the access to housing, if the bank is distributing loans to students. All those type of products have a direct impact either on education, on gender equality, on the green economy, green transition. So you find real economic opportunities in the SDGs, and this is something I wanted to say as well. The SDGs are a framework for a better society, but also a better economy. And so it's part of CSR, but it's good for CSR and it's good for the economic world. It's a combination of both.
That's interesting, and also I think that the SDG subject is an example of how it is difficult to get along with the dynamic of the CSR and the SDG. The CSR is evolving, so it's very difficult to crack it, because when you think you crack it, it's already evolving to the new thing, okay? And it's making it difficult for the rating agencies, for the investor, and at the end of the day, for the companies who have to answer a different questionnaire each time and to try to crack it. So, but that's the level of maturity of the industry. We are still at the infancy, I think, and I guess that in 10 years it will be much more standardized, and we are all working to make the path through that. So, Antonio, are you ready?
I'm ready.
So first of all, be nice with Israel. Also, we stuck you in the airport for 1 hour, please.
Yeah.
But really, we would like to understand what is your understanding of how mitigate the Israeli situation.
Yeah, it's a very good question. So first of all, I'm very nice with Israel, because every time I'm here, it's like being in Italy. It's the same weather, the same faces.
Same food, same weather.
Food. Yes, pizza is good. I tested yesterday. So I want to give you an overview, first of all, regarding Sustainalytics. It's a global ESG research company. So we have 600 clients all over the world, and we rate 8,000 companies. So before answering to that specific question, you need to realize, of course, I won't go into the development of the methodology because we don't have time. And one important thing to remember, one key point, is that every time we analyze a company, we send the analysis, the entire company analysis to the company. Why? Because you can have the best analysts in the world, the best processes, but you can make mistake. And nothing will ever replace the contract with Israeli companies. So we are going to tackle one particular point that was highlighted in the previous panel, and in this panel as well, the lack of communication. In some cases, it's a very practical point. So an Israeli company, any company, can put all the information, all the inputs they want, but there is one important thing. They must be very clear to state the contact person. It's a very stupid detail, but in some cases it's very difficult to identify the key contact person at company level. So we tend to send the company analysis to the wrong person. Could be the financial director, the investor relations, the human resources, and we give 2 weeks to reply. And because we rate 8,000 companies, it's not possible to give more time. So in some cases, there is a lack of communication. It's very important to communicate because Israeli company will understand the point of view of the ESG rating company, which is aligned with the point of view of the responsible investment community. And so there is an economy of scale here because you have different investors all over the world, like Nordea before, for example, but you have hundreds of them. So by having a dialogue with the rating agencies, and you have a few of them, you have the best here, you can reduce the amount of time you spend, and you can improve your communication on the most important topics. And somehow it's better to test your communication strategy with an ESG rating agency rather than with the investor directly. So by engaging with us, rating agencies, you will improve your communication and you will be ready to tackle the most important questions from investors. So you can be able to communicate in the right way, putting the right figures to the right topics and explaining. Because after all, it's all a beauty context. So if you are a beautiful company, you need to show how beautiful you are. So if you don't communicate, just innovation, just having a good financial matrix, this is not enough for responsible community. So this is a kind of introduction, which is good to understand the topic. I'm talking now about the elephant in the room, if you want, because what I like in Israeli people is that they are direct and open, and they don't like the blah, 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 the usual blah, blah. So I want to talk about the point, the key question that you will face from investors, responsible investors, not all investors. I would say more the Nordic investors from the Netherlands, for example, but not especially from France. France, they don't care a lot about this topic, is of course the behavior in the settlements. So how companies develop products and services regarding the settlements, so the impact in the settlements. So these investors are not against, if you want, they're not there to boycott Israel, but they want to understand the impact of a given product regarding the settlements. So the philosophy is pretty straightforward. If the product or the service is improving the conditions of people in the settlements, this is good. If otherwise the product or the service is increasing the tension in the settlements, this is bad. And of course you have shadows of gray, I don't know if 50 or not, but there is of course a scale to understand the impact of the product. So I can give you a pretty easy to understand example. If you take a bulldozer, the bulldozer itself is not bad or good, it's the utilization. So if the bulldozer is used in agriculture, this is good. If the bulldozer is used to destroy houses, for a Nordic investor, this is not good. So the point, as I said before, is communication, is communicating, explaining, and first of all, having a disclosure with the rating agencies, because it's a long process. It's not black or white. It's just good to have this type of dialogue with the rating agencies in order to improve and tackle the communication strategy in the right way.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for tackling directly the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Killing it.
No. We are. Who said that? We are CSR. We not kill elephants. Please.
I would never think.
It will stay in the room for a long time. Don't worry. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
So Joseph, you heard Antonio. Sam also talk about elephants. What do you have to say to us?
Well, thank you, Philip, for this opportunity, and Antonio for saving me about 2 minutes of the limited time that I've got to go into this complex issue. Let me first start by saying, try to connect some of the dots from the earlier session and this session. We are talking about ESGs and the importance and
עדיף שזה יהיה עם הסטנד.
עם הסטנד, כדי שזה לא מרגיש.
Take that off my time, please. No, so it's clearly that today, and I think this is the one thing that it was not said at all, that the whole issue of CSR, ESGs has economic value. And without going to that, then this whole discussion is in a different place, where I think this was made clearly in the earlier session, that today we're not talking about CSR just for CSR. It is part of the economic ecosystem, and it cannot be ignored by anyone who seriously wants to be a player in a global world. Saying that, we also brought in a couple of, the issue came up of disclosure, and it came out clearly that, first of all, the investors, the ratings want to hear the Israeli companies, but also from Ulrika said it clearly, also the investors have a responsibility on this side. So this is a question. And then we come and then we say with the ESGs that they're coming in a very, and here I would say even the whole discussion today until this last speaker was in a very theoretical, sterile situation, and now we have to dive into reality. No one likes to hear the word blacklist. No one likes to hear the word exclusion. Not Israelis, not foreign companies. And here we came out of this discussion a clear tactics or different ways of presenting. One will say we're looking what to include, one will say we're looking what to exclude. And that, I think, is something I learned just in the last minutes, saying that this might be the pinpoint of why we have this whole issue of problem of disclosure. The Israeli company, and it was said here by many who have come here and done their due diligence and work, have a lot to show the CSR world. This does not come because Israel is a leader in CSR. This is part of the DNA of the Israeli society. We could go back into history and all that, but when an Israeli hears the word of a blacklist, it reminds them something else. And this is a cultural issue that has to be remembered and causes the communication problem that we're all saying about. The problem is not if CSR, ESGs is important or not. And the problem is not that they don't have what to show. The problem is what is the reason they're being asked these questions. And here I'll tell you, I really thank you for this opening. Because if the question here is, I'm in the territories, am I behaving okay? We already started on the wrong foot. You should be looking, if the Israeli company, the first question has to be to it, what is your ESGs, what is your CSR policy? Not what is your ESG policy in the territories. Because those that had made that, and I learned a new word the other day, incident. Some of the analysts start to look at the Israeli companies because there was an incident. What is the incident? They wrote to investors saying, this company is in the territories is illegal, that means you're doing something illegal. So he's starting already from, it's negative, it's already, you're doing something illegal, and he wants an answer. Instead of coming and say, let's look at the Israeli company like we look at every other company around the world, because every company, you'll always find that they're in what we call a risk zone. They have things that they have to evaluate and do deeper things. But when you come and the point of contact with the Israeli companies starts from a negative, from a improper or a conflictable issue. And I'm not coming taking sides saying which is correct or not, but if you start, you're always going to have mistrust and confusion. So if I have one message clear to all of you around the table and all those, is you have to use this in a positive way. There are difficult questions that have to be answered, but if you don't start positively, you'll never move to the second step, and it just gets more and more difficult to reopen a door that was slammed shut before you even started. So again, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, it was very clear. Antonio, did you listen to that? So Noga, we'll take another angle of the ESG, and it's the new directive of the Commissioner of Insurance regarding social investment for institutional investor. Can you go a little bit with it.
Thank you. I think the interesting thing about this directive is first the understanding of the commissioner that it's about risks and it's about growth. And I think that's a very important point. That
What is it first? Can you elaborate on
It's adopt or disclose. The idea is that any institutional investor will have to say, does it have a policy for responsible investments? And if it doesn't, it has to declare that we don't look at those issues. And even this small thing will have to make the institutional investors look at it and decide if they are there or there. And I think, first of all, there will be a marketing impact here. And I think it's a very important thing. But the question is how they take it from here. And I think the institutional investors in Israel will have, when we speak to them, we have, I think it's 3 stages that they'll go through. And I think it's interesting also for the companies to understand those milestones, because that's what will affect what we need from them. And I think first of all, it's a mapping our portfolio. I think when we work with, we already work with different financial institutions, the first thing they want to know is, how is the current situation? We have a portfolio already done. So how are we with ESG in this portfolio? And there are databases around the world that we are here with, and there is database about the Israeli companies. And so there are the tools that financial investments could find out. First of all, the mapping. Where are we? How dangerous are we? How risky are we? We are exposing our clients. The second stage will be deciding on a policy and a strategy. I think that will be the institutional investors in Israel will have to decide on what policy are they taking in terms of climate change, in terms of bribery, in terms of what strategy are they taking. Is it best in class, integration, and what kind of that? So that's the second third. And the third phase would be, and it's not parallel, someone would go that, and when we're working with, we see them going from everywhere. And I think the next thing will be product development. And we see already that we're working with different institutional investors are developing products for the Israeli client. And I think here it's important to know that, first of all, how will that affect the companies? I think, first of all, a matter of disclosure. And I think we spoke all about this panel was raised the fact of disclosure and the lack of disclosure of the Israeli companies. I think the lack of language is a very important, challenge, because, for example, we as a local provider, we can go to the companies, discuss with them in Hebrew. We know them from different different organizations. So we know the people, we know the contacts. So it's not enough to answer just Greeneye and its contact, but it's important for them to understand that when they produce a paper, it has to be in English. And by the way, that's an important thing, is in terms of legally a binding thing, the only binding document is the Hebrew one. So sometimes we find companies. We had a funny thing that we found a company that still had the marks, delete this, take this off, and that was on the website. So we need to understand that while we know it's the only binding thing, the Hebrew part, we need to know that it's there. The other thing that I think that the company should do is the idea of understanding that there is going to be engagement. And engagement, again, I think most of the companies do engagement is the understanding that you need to be involved and take it as a working tool. Look at it as what we need to improve next and absorb it that way. And I think the last thing is being attractive is the SDG. I think the companies, what's interesting with the Israeli companies, many of them have SDG, some kind of contribution. And an interesting thing we did is we looked at the Israeli companies, the 125, and we found the SDG companies, and we tracked them historically, and they're doing better if you pick just those. It's not the main. It's not this. It's not from the suspicious companies that we usually think of Israel. But if you look at the wider picture, we see that they are making, in terms of returns, they are better than the benchmark. So I think it's a very interesting process. I think it will take time for the institutional investors to adopt it. I think the first comers will have a big advantage in terms of marketing, because I think we see that we already have a lot of interest from the public. So I think it's going to be very interesting, and I think they'll have to take the challenge.
Thank you. It's really a new issue that Israeli organizations have to understand, because it will have a very important impact. I would like to take a question from the audience. Yes, Jeremy. So if you can also introduce yourself.
Hi, do you hear me? Yes, thank you very much for this really interesting panel. My name is Jeremy. I'm doing some academic research on CSR issues, most specifically focused on Israel situation. So I would like to understand and ask the question to all of you, I would like a clear example of what's in the mind of the analysts when they take the decision concretely to exclude an Israeli company. So the most recent example I can give you is what happened last month in Denmark. There's a company called Sam Pension, and it happens to be one of VigeoEiris customers. Sam Pension decided to exclude it, four companies working in the settlements. Why? Because they've been pressured by the BDS movement in January this year. So BDS said, you're the first Danish investor subsidiary of the Israeli occupation. And Sam Pension said, no, it's not true. You can't say because I'm investing in Caterpillar, you talk about bulldozer. It's not because I invest in Caterpillar, which is an American company that sells bulldozer to Israel, that you can say that I'm funding the occupation. And a few months later, in October, they said, wait, let's talk about our CSR policy regarding occupied territories. And they say, we talked to VigeoEiris, and they have a database called Business in Occupied Lands, ready-made database, 180 companies listed, maybe blacklisted, I don't know, you decide. And they say, they compared their portfolio with the list, and they say, yes, we have some companies that are on the list. So let's exclude, and they excluded Bank Hapoalim, Bank Leumi. So I really would like to understand what's in their mind when they say, let's kick off Bank Hapoalim because it's an obstacle to the peace.
No, so first of all, the extra financial rating agency do not take any decision on the companies. What we do is just to collect information that are asked by our clients. So the thing is that the United Nations is writing these letters to a number of companies which are operating in these settlements, and because they want to understand, and because they will issue a report maybe later in December. So what we had to do was to say to our clients, look, there is this list and there are these companies. Then it's the client, it's the investors that, depending on their philosophy, they take the final decision. But it's not an advice from extra financial rating agency. And this is where I think it's even more important that Israeli companies report their point of view.
Yes, I fully agree with Cristina. So we do not build up a blacklist. It's very important that to understand. And I can discuss for my clients, let's say in the Nordic area, they do not want to apply blacklist. So this is a key point. They would like to invest in Israeli companies because these are pearls, if you want, in terms of innovation and financial data and so on. But there are some situations where if they do not have enough disclosure, they don't want to take a risk. So if there is something like the Caterpillar, for example, that could be used in a way or another, if they don't know from us because we don't have the information, or for the company because the company is not disclosing, they need to take the risk to take that company in the portfolio and being attacked by an NGO maybe in the future or not. And so for security reasons, if they don't have this information, they prefer to exclude the company. So this is the philosophy. But it's not something done, let's say, automatically with an equation, Israel plus Caterpillar equal exclusion.
Yeah, and maybe the other thing that sorry, no, go ahead.
Go ahead. I just want to say that for a Danish investor, I mean, Denmark is a very small country, about 5.5 million, and the pressure on the occupational pension funds, which is the setup in Denmark, is so strong, and we have, I mean, we've been in the region because that's where we're from, and we know how they have struggled, and they are actually afraid of some of these watchdogs, and it gets into the news, it gets to their members, and it just creates a situation of almost panic. So what is the easy way out? That is to exclude, right? But it's again from the research and the service providers' point of view. Everyone is working with their clients, and they are the investors, and they have their investment strategy, policy, and they make all their investment decisions. And they ask the service providers and the data providers for data research in line with their investment policy. But there are a number of investors in the Nordic region that themselves say, this is our blacklist. And so there is the use of blacklists by a number of investors in the region, and also in the Netherlands maybe, and you know, parts of the world. But it is a challenge. So absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, maybe just the last thing, because we discussed about the fact that we build ESG scores of companies. This kind of thing is not part of the ESG score. So the fact that the company operates in the settlement, etc., it's really another research line that we we collect the information for the clients that want it. But we don't put this stuff in our ESG score. It doesn't mean that Israeli companies will have bad score because they are operating there. This is really two totally separated things. So this is important to highlight.
And I'll just add to that. I mean, a lot of what I'm about to say is a repeat, but we don't. To my knowledge, we don't have a list of companies that are operating in occupied territories or whatever. But we do have a product that relates to controversies. So our job with that product is to basically just tell investors all allegations that are going against companies. They have to be legitimate allegations, but they're not about convictions, they're about allegations. And so we just provide that list to our clients because they request it. And somebody could probably build a screen that says, which companies are controversial because they're in occupied lands, for instance. But to my knowledge, none of our clients ask for that specifically. But also we never tell our investors how to use our information. We provide that to them because it's what they're requesting. So it's up to them. And I think the reason investors make these decisions is because their constituents are coming to them, and that is their feeling towards a particular topic. And as I said before, we don't have a lot of American investors that come to us to try to exclude companies that are operating in the Palestinian territories. But I have had experience where there were, years ago when Caterpillar was in the news and it was a big topic. We had some clients that their constituents were coming to the investment managers and saying, divest from Caterpillar, they're involved in these horrible things, and our clients end up coming to us to look for, they didn't want to divest from Caterpillar. It was actually could have been viewed as illegal in the U.S., but they had to come to us to understand why and what they could tell their constituents to go back to them and discuss, why they don't think they needed divest. And I think what really should happen is that they shouldn't be coming to us. They should be hearing that narrative from the companies themselves also, and not just because otherwise they have no firepower to go against kind of these demands from some of their activist constituents.
And one sentence about controversies. One of the things of controversies, again, in some of the companies, you're being asked to, what do you think about this controversy? And it's another option of the company to answer. So even on the specific, even if it's not a criteria, when it's a controversy and you get the question, you can answer, so use it.
Yeah.
Thank you. We had a bold discussion, I think. We had both macro view, okay, from the Bloomberg world, to the investor view in Europe, in the States. We look also at different angles, the SDGs, the controversial issues, elephants. And I would like really to thank you, all of you, to make the effort to come to Israel, to answer difficult questions. It's not easy. And we look forward to continue working with you to make Israeli companies better, to make Israel better, to make the world better. Thank you very much.